I always thought my stepfather was a parasite, but my mom loved him, so I kept quiet. Then he sold the house my father left me and spent the money on himself. He thought I would just accept it. He was wrong. My father died when I was 15. Heart attack, they said. Too much stress and not enough exercise. I remember standing at his funeral, watching the casket being lowered into the ground, my mother sobbing beside me. The gravity of it all didn't really hit me until later that night when I sat alone in my room, staring at the last photo we took together. Dad wasn't rich, but he was smart with his money. He left me his most valuable possession, our house in Oakwood Heights. It wasn't a mansion, but it was in one of the better neighborhoods in town, with good schools and safe streets. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a backyard with an old oak tree where my tire swing still hung. The mortgage was paid off years ago. When you're older, the house will be yours, Alex, Mom told me through tears as we sorted through Dad's paperwork. Your father wanted to make sure you always had a place to call home. For the first year, it was just Mom and me figuring things out. She took on extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. I picked up odd jobs around the neighborhood, mowing lawns, walking dogs, anything to help out. We were making it work, finding our new normal. Then Brad Mitchell showed up. Mom met him at a hospital fundraiser. He was volunteering, though I later learned he was only there because a judge ordered community service for a DUI. But Mom didn't know that then. All she saw was a handsome, charming guy who made her laugh for the first time in months. Brad was 43, never married, no kids. He had what he called flexible employment, which meant no real job. He was always between opportunities, waiting for some big break that was perpetually just around the corner. But he had a silver tongue and knew exactly what to say to make people, especially vulnerable women, believe in him. He's just going through a rough patch, Mom would defend him when I pointed out that he never paid for anything. He's been so supportive emotionally, Alex. You don't understand how much that means to me. I did understand one thing, Brad was a leech. He moved in with us 6 months after they started dating. Suddenly, his clothes filled my father's closet. His toiletries cluttered the bathroom counter. His feet propped up on our coffee table while he watched TV all day. Just temporary, he'd say with that practiced smile. Until my next project comes through. There was always a next project. A business opportunity. A startup idea. A friend who needed an investor. But somehow, the money always disappeared, and the returns never materialized. Your mom and I are a team now, he'd tell me, hand on my shoulder, cologne overwhelming. That makes us family, right? I'd nod and slip away, counting the days until I could leave for college. I kept my thoughts to myself because Mom seemed happy. She smiled more. She stopped crying herself to sleep. For that alone, I tolerated Brad. When I graduated high school, I got a scholarship to State University, about 3 hours away. Not far enough to escape completely, but enough distance to breathe. I came home for holidays and occasional weekends, noticing small changes each time. Dad's books, gone from the shelves. His workshop in the garage, converted to storage for Brad's golf clubs and fishing gear. Mom looking more tired, working more hours. Everything okay with money? I asked her during winter break of my freshman year. Oh, we're fine, she said, but her eyes darted away. Brad's consulting business is just taking a while to build up clientele. Consulting. Right. His latest career. I noticed he had a new watch, though, something that looked expensive on a wrist that had never known hard work. During my sophomore year, I called home less frequently. Focused on my studies. Made new friends. Started dating someone. Life was moving forward. I felt guilty sometimes, knowing I'd left Mom with Brad, but she was an adult. She'd made her choice. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in April. I was in the library studying for midterms when my phone buzzed. Mr. Kaplan, our next-door neighbor since I was in elementary school. Alex? Sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. Did you sell your house? My heart skipped. What? No. What are you talking about? There's a moving truck outside. New family looking around. Real estate agent putting up a sold sign. The blood drained from my face. That's impossible. That's what I thought. Your mom and Brad are packing up. Didn't look right to me. I thanked him, hung up, and immediately called Mom. No answer. I tried Brad. Straight to voicemail. I called the house phone. Nothing. I left the library without my books, got in my car, and drove the 3 hours home without stopping. My mind raced the entire way. There had to be an explanation. Mom wouldn't sell the house. It was mine, Dad left it to me. She knew that. But as I pulled onto our street, the sold sign stood in the front yard like an accusation. I parked and ran inside. The living room was half empty, boxes everywhere. Mom sat at the kitchen table, staring at a mug of cold coffee. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red-rimmed and guilty. Alex, she whispered. I was going to call you. What's going on? I demanded, my voice shaking. Why is there a sold sign in our yard? That's when Brad sauntered in from the back of the house, a self-satisfied smile on his face. He wore a new polo shirt and designer jeans. Well, look who's here, he said, as if I'd arrived for a surprise party rather than to confront them. Perfect timing, Alex. We could use some help with the boxes. What have you done? I asked, my voice barely controlled. Brad shrugged, casual as could be. The market's hot right now. Got more than asking price, actually. Good time to sell. Sell? This isn't your house to sell. He chuckled, the sound grating on my ears. Well, son, the house was in your mom's name too, you know. Joint ownership with your dad. And since we're married now. Married? The word hit me like a physical blow. They had gotten married without telling me. Mom looked down, twisting her hands. A simple gold band I hadn't noticed before caught the light. It was a small ceremony at the courthouse last month. We were going to tell you, but we got busy with this great opportunity, Brad cut in. Couldn't pass it up. I turned to Mom, ignoring him. The house was supposed to be mine. Dad wanted me to have it. I know, sweetie, but Brad convinced me. I mean, we decided it would be better to invest the money. For your future. Brad nodded vigorously. Absolutely. I've got connections with this investment group. Triple returns in 18 months, guaranteed. Where are the proceeds from the sale? I demanded. A flicker of something, discomfort, guilt, crossed Mom's face. Brad answered for her. Well, we had some debts to clear up. And the moving expenses. Plus, I needed to invest in my business to get it off the ground properly. But don't worry, there's plenty left for that investment I mentioned. I looked around at the boxes, at my mother's face, at Brad's new clothes and the keys to what looked like a new car on the counter. The truth hit me like a tidal wave. You stole my inheritance, I said quietly. Brad's smile tightened. Now, that's a harsh way to put it, Alex. We're family. What's mine is yours, what's yours is mine, right? Family. I laughed, a hollow sound. You married my mother to get your hands on my father's house. Alex, please, Mom pleaded. It's not like that. Isn't it? Where's the money, Mom? Where are you moving to? An upgrade, or did he convince you to downsize so there'd be more cash for his investments? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "We got a nice condo downtown," Brad finally said. "Modern. Low maintenance. Your mom deserves to relax more." "A condo," I repeated. "So where's the rest of the money?" "A house in this neighborhood would sell for at least $300,000. More uncomfortable silence. "I think you should go, Alex," Brad said, his false warmth evaporating. "You're upsetting your mother." I looked at Mom, who couldn't meet my eyes. "Is this what you want? For him to steal everything Dad worked for?" "He's not stealing," she whispered. "We're building a future together. A future built on lies." I turned to Brad, who had dropped all pretense of friendliness now. "You won't get away with this." He smirked. "I already have. The house is sold. The papers are signed. It's done." "The house belonged to my father," I said through gritted teeth. "He wanted me to have it." Brad stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The house belonged to your father. Now it doesn't. That's life, kid. Things change. People die. Move on." Something in me snapped at his callous words, but I held myself back. Getting into a physical fight wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I turned and walked out, ignoring my mother's calls to come back. In my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, I made a vow. Brad would not win. Not this time. Not with my father's legacy. I didn't return to school immediately. Instead, I went to a motel and started making calls. First to my dad's old friend, a lawyer named Richard Hansen. "I need to know my options," I told him. Richard didn't sound optimistic. "If your mother was co-owner and she consented to the sale, it might be legally binding, Alex. But let me look into it." Next, I called my Aunt Sarah, my father's sister. She had never liked Brad. "I knew that man was trouble," she said. "Your father would be heartbroken." "I need your help," I told her. "I need to find out where the money went." Over the next week, I began gathering information. I didn't confront Brad or Mom again, not directly. Instead, I watched and listened. I learned that they had closed on the condo, worth less than half what our house sold for. I discovered that Brad had indeed bought a new car, a $60,000 luxury sedan. And through a friend who worked at the local casino, I found out that Brad had been gambling heavily, dropping thousands at the high-stakes tables. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Melissa, Mom's friend from the hospital, called me out of the blue. "Your mother doesn't know I'm calling," she said. "But I'm worried about her. Brad convinced her to take out a second mortgage on the house before they sold it." "I don't think she told you that." "A second mortgage?" My stomach dropped. "How much?" $100,000. She said it was for some investment opportunity Brad found. The pieces were falling into place. Brad hadn't just sold my house, he'd drained as much equity from it as possible first. Armed with this information, I went to Richard's office. He had news of his own. "I've been looking into your stepfather's background," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "He's done this before. 3 times that I can find." The folder contained news clippings and court records. Brad Mitchell, under various slight name variations, Bradley Mitchum, Bradford Miller, had married women, convinced them to liquidate assets, and then disappeared with the money. "He's a con man," Richard said. "And a good one. Can we prove it? Can we get the house back?" Richard shook his head. "The sale itself appears legal. Your mother had the right to sell. But..." He tapped the folder. "There are other angles we can pursue." Those other angles began with a careful examination of Brad's finances. With the help of a forensic accountant Richard knew, we traced the money. The second mortgage, the proceeds from the house sale, most of it had been transferred into accounts solely in Brad's name, despite his claims of joint investments. But Brad had made a critical mistake. In his arrogance, he hadn't paid the taxes on the capital gains from the house sale. And he had a pattern of tax evasion going back years. The IRS doesn't mess around, Richard told me. And they have powers that even regular law enforcement doesn't. I made an anonymous tip to the IRS, providing detailed information about Brad's finances, his unreported income, and the recent windfall from my father's house. Then I waited. It took 3 months. 3 months of watching from a distance as Brad spent my inheritance. 3 months of limited contact with my mother, who gradually realized that her new husband wasn't investing their money, he was spending it. The day the IRS agents showed up at their condo was a Tuesday, just like the day I discovered the betrayal. I wasn't there, but Melissa called me afterward. They took boxes of documents, she told me. Brad was shouting, trying to explain. Your mom was in tears. That was just the beginning. Once the IRS started digging, they found plenty. Tax fraud. Failure to report income. Multiple identities. And with their investigation came freezes on Brad's accounts, including the money from my father's house. I finally went to see Mom at the hospital during her lunch break. She looked thinner, older, the light gone from her eyes. The IRS is saying we owe hundreds of thousands in back taxes and penalties, she said, her voice hollow. Brad says it's all a mistake, but they have records, Alex. Records of money I never knew about. He lied to you, I said gently. About everything. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I was such a fool. You were grieving, I corrected her. He took advantage of that. The condo is underwater now, she continued. He took out a loan against it too, without telling me. I signed the papers without reading them. How could I be so stupid? I took her hand. It's going to be okay, Mom. How? We're going to lose everything. I've lost everything already, including you. You haven't lost me, I assured her. And this isn't over yet. The next day, I filed a civil lawsuit against Brad, alleging fraud and undue influence. Richard had helped me prepare the case meticulously, gathering evidence that Brad had manipulated my mother, that he had misrepresented the purpose of selling the house, that he had diverted the proceeds for personal use rather than the family investments he had promised. When Brad was served with the lawsuit papers, he showed up at my apartment, rage distorting his usually smooth features. You think you're smart, don't you? He spat. You won't get a penny. I'll transfer everything offshore before I let you touch it. The accounts are already frozen, I reminded him calmly. And the IRS has priority over anything that's left. But this isn't about money, Brad. This is about justice. Justice? He laughed, an ugly sound. Grow up, kid. The world doesn't care about justice. Maybe not, I agreed. But I do. And so did my father. Brad's legal troubles multiplied. The IRS investigation led to criminal charges for tax evasion. My civil suit moved forward, with overwhelming evidence of his pattern of fraud. And 2 of his previous victims came forward after seeing his name in the news, filing their own claims. Within 6 months, Brad's carefully constructed life had completely unraveled. His luxury car was repossessed. The condo went into foreclosure. He was facing jail time for the tax charges. And a judge ruled in my favor in the civil case, ordering him to repay the value of my father's house, money he no longer had. As his world collapsed, Brad did what con men do. He ran. Or tried to. The authorities caught him at the Canadian border with fake identification and what was left of his cash. In a strange twist of fate, the people who had purchased our house decided to sell after learning about its troubled history. With a loan from Aunt Sarah and my own savings, I was able to buy it back, not at the same price, but it was worth every penny to reclaim my father's legacy. Mom moved back in with me. Our relationship was damaged but not beyond repair. She filed for divorce from Brad, who was serving time for tax evasion and attempted flight. "I don't know if I can ever make this right," she told me as we sat on the porch swing that Dad had built years ago. "You don't have to make it right," I said. "We just have to move forward." She nodded, wiping away tears. "Your father would be proud of you, Alex. You fought for what was right." I wasn't sure about that. The victory felt hollow in some ways. I had reclaimed the house, but I'd lost months of my life to anger and revenge. I'd watched my mother suffer through public humiliation and private guilt. I'd become someone harder, less trusting. Brad eventually got out of prison, though I heard he was immediately facing charges in another state for similar scams. He never contacted us again. People sometimes ask if it was worth it, going after him so relentlessly. They wonder if I wouldn't have been happier just letting it go, moving on with my life. Maybe. But some things are worth fighting for. Some betrayals cut too deep to forgive. And some lessons need to be learned the hard way. I still live in my father's house. Mom moved out eventually, finding her own place and slowly rebuilding her confidence. We have dinner together every Sunday, carefully avoiding mention of the man who almost destroyed us both. Sometimes at night, I sit on that porch swing and think about what Dad would really say if he could see me now. Would he be proud of my determination, or troubled by my ruthlessness? Would he understand the anger that still sometimes burns in me, or would he tell me to find peace? I don't have those answers. But I do have this house, these walls that hold memories of a man who worked hard and loved deeply. A man who wanted to leave something of value to his son. And no one will ever take that away from me again.